Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. Host JP John Poz with me today. Very special guest. He was in WWF, AWA. I mean, he's been all around the globe wrestling. Mr. Tom Stone. Tom, welcome in. How you doing?
It's great to be here. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. What's going on in your world? What have you been up to?
I'm old. That's about it. And like most of us old wrestlers, we're paying the price now for what we did 30 years ago.
I believe it. Are you doing anything wrestling related like nowadays or no?
Nah. There's a guy in town who runs a camp, and I go down once in a while. But today's wrestling doesn't interest me at all. I walked away in
Really? So you don't follow it anymore?
No, I walked away in 94 when my kids started playing tournament baseball. And I mean, other than a few matches here and there, I never did anything with it. And even the last 3 or 4 years, I'd go to a WWF taping and I didn't know any of the guys. I didn't watch the TV. So the fun was doing it in the ring.
So
it wasn't.
You didn't like the style or anything?
I don't like the style now. I think I don't know why anyone would want to do it.
So basically,
I mean, the thrill of it was being able to make the crowd do what you wanted them to do and finding out what they wanted and giving it to them, setting it all up in the dressing room and going out and just doing spots just to do them, to me, doesn't make any sense. But that's
so
me.
the style today is just not something you're into or you're digging. You just
Nope,
not liking today's wrestling.
Not at all. I mean,
What
when
about,
you have a guy like Orange Cassidy who stands there with his hands in his pockets. Do you know what Harley Race would have done if you had stood in front of him with your hands in your pockets? I don't think you would have walked out of the ring. That's just me.
That gimmick's terrible. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that at all. Like that. I mean,
the stuff they do
weird.
today is unbelievable, but there's no. Why are you doing it? I guess. I mean, it's a different era, right? I mean, when I did it, 20% of the fans believed it was all real, and 60% when they were at the show weren't sure. Today, they've all been told it's all fake. So,
the comedy aspect today too is not good. I don't know, like that stuff, like the Orange Cassidy stuff, is terrible.
Yeah, I don't consider him comedy. I consider him a buffoon, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, we used to have guys who could do comedy. Dick Murdoch could do comedy. Terry Funk was great at comedy. Myself and Jake Milliman could do comedy and still you could get back into a match and get the people to still buy what you were doing. I don't get today's wrestling. I'm sorry. Did we shut down? Hello? John, I do not have anything from you.
Sorry, I lost you for a second there.
I lost you too.
You were saying though, some comedy is good.
Yeah, comedy's great if you do it in the second or third match, something to break up the show. I don't think they even know that anymore, but.
Yeah, I mean, they'll do stuff in the first match that should be in the main event.
Yeah, it's completely different today than it was, and so if I'm going to watch wrestling, I'll watch old wrestling, not today's.
So when you did break in, right, probably late 70s, early 80s, who was the trainer? Like, who actually broke in? Was it Vern Gagne? Was it AWA? Was it Brad Rankins?
No, I didn't go to their school camp, unfortunately. I got trained locally by Jules Strongbow, who wrestled in the AWA as Frank Hill. And then I went to Lou Klein's wrestling school in Detroit. I was there 3 weeks. He would be gone all week. He'd come in one day. He taught me a headlock 3 different weeks. I finally just packed up and went home. So, and Frank Hill got me my first bookings.
When you do break in, though, do you know it's like kayfabe and all that other stuff? Because you always hear some of the guys say, "Oh, they when they trained me, it was like a shoot. Like they trained you in a certain manner where they wanted you to think it was a shoot."
No, I mean, I knew it was a work. My dad was the ring announcer for Vern in Milwaukee and Green Bay and Rockford. So I was around the business, and yeah, they kayfabe my dad, but he wasn't an idiot, so I knew it was a work.
So when you get in, right, and like, what's your first like territory after you kind of break in, after you start training? Like, where do you hit? Is it AWA or where do you work first?
The first place they sent me, Frank Hill sent me to wrestling at the Chase for Pat O'Connor. And my first match was with Gary Young and Dan Diamond, and they beat the piss out of me. And when I came upstairs, I could hardly walk. And then he told me I had to work with Brody. And Frank came up to me and said, "Let me thank you now in case I can't thank you afterwards." After two little guys that just beat the hell out of me. Frank was nice, treated me okay. Never had a problem with Frank. I wrestled him 4 or 5 different times. We were actually, I think we were friends.
So the experience of working him wasn't what some others might have had working him, where he like
if he didn't like you, I mean, I don't know if you've talked to Al Snow at all, but one of his first matches was a handicap match, and I guess Brody flattened the other guy's nose. I mean, but he treated Al Snow okay, so you never knew with Frank. We had a big guy in Milwaukee. His name was Herman Schaefer, and Brody beat the piss out of him. And he came back from St. Louis looking like the Elephant Man. So you never knew.
Wow.
And Herman was 400 pounds. He wasn't a little guy.
Yeah, the Lex Luger story too, with Luger, him beating the hell out of Luger.
But I got along with him, and I actually never had anyone shoot on me. The only guy who ever the only guy who ever hurt me in the ring was Vader when he was first breaking in, and he just worked rough. We were in Vegas, and I was trying to protect him because the way he tried giving bumps, when I fell, I could have kicked him where he doesn't want to get kicked. So because I'm trying to avoid hurting him, he busted my lip. It was no big deal. And then I had to switch dressing rooms in Vegas and go into his dressing room. And I got in his face, and Jerry Blackwell got between us. Otherwise, I probably would be a dead man.
Very interesting, though. With
you didn't want to back down from anybody,
Right.
If you back down and you got that reputation, that wouldn't have been cool.
But it's funny, though. Vader, though, had the reputation a little bit later on of stiffing some guys in the ring and really kind of taking liberties with some guys.
I mean, I got him when he was Leon White just breaking in. It might have been his second or third match. Who the hell knows?
The Baby Bull at that point, right? He was just the Baby Bull Leon White.
Yeah.
Is that a big responsibility when they're bringing a guy in and you got to wrestle like his first or second match? Like, you know what I mean? As far as just taking care of the guy?
Well, I mean, sometimes when Saito came in, Vern booked me with him in a house show in Minneapolis. When I came out of the ring, he said, "Should I keep him?" I mean, he was taking my advice. So I worked a lot of the guys when they first came in, David Schultz, Rick Martel. I mean, I was a pretty good hand, so they didn't have to worry with me. Which was what made it nice in New York was I had worked with most of the guys in New York, either in, I worked in Mid-South for a year for Bill Watts. So I either knew half the guys from down there, like Orendorff and Jake, and then I knew all the Minneapolis guys. So
When that's happening, right? Is that a big honor though? Because it's almost like you're like the scout in the ring for Vern, who's behind the scenes.
I never took it as an honor. It was just my job. See, by that time, once I did my year and a half on the road in Kansas City and Mid-South and came back, I knew I was never going back on the road. So I knew what my job was. It was to get the other guy over. And as long as they could trust you, and if Martel came in, the other guys in the locker room would let them know that they could trust me. And when I worked with any of those guys, if I was the heel, I led the matches. I called all my own matches. They listened to me, and so I never had a problem because everybody basically knew I could work.
What did you think of Rick Martel at that point?
Well, Rick was a good hand. He wanted to get into real estate, and I owned like 90 rental properties in Milwaukee at the time. So we'd sit at the matches and talk real estate. But he was a great hand. But I liked to rib him because he had to do 20 minutes and Barron only had to do 6. And they were probably getting the same money. So.
Right, of course, yeah. That's great. Real estate, huh? So you were really kind of, I don't know, like the head of the curve with pulling some good real estate, right? Getting property and everything.
Yeah, I had a partner in Milwaukee, and we started buying in, I don't know, right about the time I started. When I got into wrestling. Yeah, we was probably in '80 that we started buying. It was all at the same time. It was after I came back. So it was after I came back from Mid-South. We started buying, and it was fun. And Rick wanted to get into it. In fact, I think Rick is a realtor down in Florida somewhere right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure he's still into real estate to this day, I'm pretty sure, because he doesn't do anything really with wrestling anymore. He's kind of to himself. But I think it was real estate.
Yeah, I think he's a realtor down in Florida. But nobody has his phone number because otherwise I'd give him a call. But no one seems to know how to get a hold of Rick. Yeah,
he is a hard man to get a hold of. I've tried a few times over the years, and just hard.
I guess if you could find his real estate office, you could find him.
I have a guy who's friends with him that could like text in between, but it never goes anywhere. It just kind of lost it in the middle. But yeah, he's kind of away from wrestling. He doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, when he walked away completely.
Interesting too, because I'm sure millions of fans would probably want to meet him, and you know what I mean, and talk to him, and all. But he doesn't do signings or anything.
Yeah, well, some of us are done with it. We did it, and okay, time to move on.
Right. What about Dr. D, David Schultz? What did you think about Schultz?
I only worked him once. He wasn't here that long in the AWA. I worked him in Milwaukee. He was fine. I mean,
and another guy though has that reputation being a little stiff. Wasn't stiff at all.
He wasn't stiff at all. And sometimes you work to the level of your opponent. So if I'm working with Bockwinkel, I'm going to be a lot stiffer than if I'm working with Stevens, because Stevens is light as a feather. So I'm trying to be the same to him as he was to me. Nick was stiff.
What was it like AWA at that point, right, for you? Because are you thinking you're going to be, like a star there? Like what's your thought process, and like what do you think about AWA at that point?
No, because what happened was I went to Kansas City in '79, and I spent most of '80 in Louisiana working for Bill Watts. And I called Wally and I said, if I come home for the summer, can I work during the summer? And then I was going to go to Portland. And I got home. I gave my notice to Bill. I got home. I called Wally, and Wally said, oh, we're all full. And I got pissed and quit for a year and a half. And I only started going back when Jake called me, Jake the Milkman, and said, "Do you want to go to Vegas?" And that's when I went back, when we started working the Showboat. So I knew at that point I was not. My job was to wrestle Brad Riggins and not have him yell boring, and to wrestle Buck Zumhoff, and then, like I said, the new guys when they come in. So I mean, I had no illusions of anything at that point.
Did you like that role though? Is that something you
fine.
kind of?
It was the role I chose. And because I was usually the one booking guys, so they were taking care of me on the side. And in the AWA, you could make as much on a Friday night as Kansas City was making in the whole week. So I could go down to Kansas City, and Dewey Robertson's down there, and I could go, "Dewey, I made 400 last Saturday night," knowing that he probably made 285 for the whole frickin' week in Kansas City, even though I probably only made 200. But I would always embellish a little.
Of course. So where does the name come from? Why Tom Stone? Where does that come from?
Wally didn't want Vern to know that I was my dad's kid. So Wally gave me that name. And then when I wanted to add the Rocky to it, he didn't want me to, because that was when the Rocky movie was going, and Rocky Stallone. But I just went in the ring and told the announcer to announce it, and he did. So Wally wasn't real thrilled, but.
Wow, so Vern never knew you were the announcer's son,
Well,
ever?
He did after, after I was there a couple times, but Wally didn't want him to know that the first time I went.
And what was Vern like? Because, obviously there's a lot of different stories out there. What was he like? Did you like him?
Vern was fine to me. He treated me okay. In fact, my first match in Minneapolis on TV was me and Herman Schaefer, the guy who got his face kicked in by Brody. It was the only time Greg and Vern teamed up on TV. So my first match was against him. And he was in teaching mode that night, because he'd get me on the ropes and go, "Stand up tall, kid." And he'd hold me. But he was always fine to me. I mean, he got mad at me twice in 15 years. He got mad at me because I married Patera one time without locking my fingers behind his head. And he was screaming at me that you can't take him, an Olympic athlete, and marry him. And Patera was standing on the other side making faces and trying to make me laugh while Vern's screaming at me. And then one night I worked with Blackwell. It was me and Nick against Blackwell and Hansen. And Vern wanted him to do the thing where he puts you on his shoulders and falls backward. I didn't want to get my ribs broke, so I told Jerry I didn't want to do it. So he power slammed me, and Vern was bent that he didn't do his back fall. But I learned a long time ago, if you didn't feel comfortable taking something, don't do it.
And the guys had no problem if you said that to him? "I'm not taking it, I'm not comfortable"?
Nope. None of them should have been. If you weren't comfortable, why would you take something?
Yeah.
I was in Florida I was in Florida on the on deck circle with Kerry Von Erich the night a kid broke his neck in the match before mine, and when they had to get Fight for Life. And I mean, he did something, he didn't have any clue how to do it, but he was afraid to say something.
Right, just agree, just to agree, even though you probably really just should say, "I'm not comfortable, I don't even know what that is," or
explain it. All he had to do was take a front fall. It was Marty Jannetty put his leg on your neck, and he just but he tried to do a roll with the foot on the back of his neck, and he snapped his neck.
Yeah, I remember that. It was brutal. Oof. But he didn't know how to take the move. Yeah, it was terrible.
Right. Well, either that or you got to show me exactly how to take it. I don't know. We cared more about the other guy's body, though, back then. The first time I was taught right away by Ray Stevens. He said the first thing he said to me was, "My body is a fine piece of bone china. So's yours. You give me your body, I'll give you mine. Give it back to me the same condition I gave it to you in. And so that's what I learned, like right when I started wrestling. And I
Do you
tried
think
to live
Ray?
by that.
You think Ray was underrated a little bit? Because I feel
Well,
like so many guys I talk to say he's one of the greatest workers they've ever worked with. But then when you look at the grand scheme of things, I don't think enough people are saying that.
well, a lot of people didn't see him when he was in Frisco, and he did things that no one else could do. But if you ask Bockwinkel called him the greatest wrestler of all time. So, I mean,
I
if
don't know.
Nick thinks he
Flair
was
took
the
a lot of
greatest
stuff from
wrestler
him
of all
too.
time,
Right,
it's like
definitely.
I
And Flair took a lot of stuff.
and then the other guy Nick puts up there is Bobby Heenan because he says Heenan could take my place or Ray's place. Nobody asked for their money back. Bobby was a hell of a hand, but Ray was
He
at
was
a
awesome.
whole other level.
What do you think made him so good? Like, what did he do that was so different or puts him on another level?
You never felt him, and this stuff all looked real. I mean, I heard when he was in Frisco though, Roy Shires would come back sometimes and says, "Jesus Christ, you can't do that. No one's going to believe you can do that shit." I mean, he was just, he did the Flair turnbuckle thing before Flair ever did. Flair calls him the greatest. So, I, to
Yeah,
me,
right. He invented that Flair turnbuckle bump.
and I think when you talk about the guy who doesn't get full recognition, to me, is Nick. Because Bockwinkel, if you watch his old matches, unlike Rick, every one of his matches is different. His match with Dusty is way different than his match with Brody or his match with Kurt Hennig. He worked a different match every night, which a lot of guys didn't do. A lot of guys did the same match every night. Nick didn't.
When you're working Nick, are you calling the match or no way? He's calling the matches.
Well, he was the
when you're
heel.
working a guy like Nick.
No, well, he was the
Okay.
heel when I worked with him. I was a babyface, so I listened to him. But Nick was funny. He'd go in the dressing room and he'd go, "Well, if this comes up, let's do this." Or if this comes, he never did any of the stuff he came up with. He called it all in the ring, but he usually did the finish the way I wanted to do it. And Nick was the kind of guy, a lot like when Flair would work with George South. He'd let South cover him. Nick would let me cover him. I mean, the last time I worked with him, I did the thing where you walk up the ropes and take him over in a headlock, and get a 2 count, he kick out, and then he finally dropped me backwards. But, so a lot of this stuff, Nick would take my input. And I always thought it was best, if you were the job guy, to give them things you knew you could do well for them. And that way, I told all my guys to do that, because that way they knew you knew what the hell you were talking about, so they could trust you. If you just sit there and listen to them, they're just going to beat the hell out of you because they don't have any clue, and that's their livelihood. So I always thought it was best if I was the one telling them what I thought we should do. And if they didn't like it, we do what they wanted, but I usually had pretty good ideas.
What about like working a guy like Dory Funk Jr.? Obviously, he's probably the baby face, right? So are you calling the match?
I never worked with Dory.
Oh, you never worked Dory. Okay. Oh, I thought you did. Okay.
I never worked with any of the Funks. I knew Terry because he came in and worked for Vern, but I never worked with him.
So when was he in St. Louis when you were there though, or never crossed paths as far as Dory?
Never crossed paths.
Wow. Okay. But where did you and Terry cross paths at?
Terry worked for Vern a little bit.
Oh, okay. Never wrestled him though, huh?
Never wrestled him.
Is that a guy you always wanted to wrestle, Terry Funk?
I didn't really care who I wrestled. I had more fun sitting talking to Terry and see, that's the other difference with today's wrestling. We were able to sit and talk to Terry and pick his brain. You might learn something, right? Today they all sit on their phones in the car. I mean, I know one time in Mini, I sat with Terry for probably a half an hour just talking wrestling. I wanted to figure out how to do comedy the right way, and I knew he was the man to, because he was the best at doing comedy and then getting back to being serious and getting the people to both laugh at the match and believe the match at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. He would do something like take a crazy bump. You'd laugh for a second and then he'd get back up and he'd slug the guy or whatever. Yeah. He was like the master of that. Kind of bringing you up and down. Yeah.
Murdoch was the other one who was a master at it.
Definitely.
And I never got to work with Dick, but I knew him.
Remember a few years ago, I got to interview Funk. Actually, a few times I got to interview him. People were like, I don't know how good his memory is. I was bringing up like dates and stuff, and he was nailing it. So I guess when he wants to or wanted to remember stuff, he could remember stuff. Or he could have been working everybody too. Like, oh, I don't know. Like maybe not wanting to talk, but I asked him certain questions, and he literally remembered exactly dates and stuff. So he was real sharp for sure. He knew super smart to the business, obviously. When you're in AWA, right? You said Mid-South too. Why did you go to Mid-South? Like what led you kind of over with Watts?
I wanted to go do it full time, so I called Geigel and got into Kansas City, and they changed. Sweetan was the booker when I was there, and then Jody Hamilton came in and took over the book, and then he brought in his crew. So he sent me to Mid-South. And my first night was in Shreveport. And I found out after the match, that night after the match, I stayed at Jake Roberts' house. They were going to fire me that night. Whoa. It was Watts was watching and Buck Robley and Grizz. And Jake said their plan was to fire you that night.
Why?
Because they didn't know me. And I had a real good match with Jerry Oates. And Shreveport was interesting because the locker rooms were on completely opposite sides of the building. So to this day, I've never met Jerry Oates. Called the whole match in the ring. Got the finish when I got into the ring. And they liked my work enough that after about a week, Robley said, "Can you get a referee shirt?" And I said, "I really don't want a referee." He says, "I want to get you paid." So I got New Orleans every Monday night. And so I wrestled about half the time and refereed about half the time. But that, looking back on it, it was an honor because they did the same thing in Mid-South for Arn. He refereed about half the time. They wanted to take care of you.
Right. They want to get you paid.
Most of the underneath guys were only making, 2-3 shots a week. And they were making maybe, if one of them was good and one was bad, but they never got New Orleans. I got New Orleans every Monday night. Granted, I was refereeing, but it was a $150 or $200 payday. So I was making $600 a week, and the other underneath guys were making $200. So,
amazing, yeah.
And then I got to carry finishes for bucks. I learned how to do finishes and.
What did you think about Watts?
Bill got along. He was great to me. I mean, the only thing I will say about Bill Watts, we were doing TV and he came in talking about you guys were the only territory making money and it's really going good. And so we're going to raise the minimum in our towns. The minimums were 50 on the bad towns. And he said, we're going to jump that up to 60. They usually had 2 bad towns a week. So, okay, an extra $20 a week in 1980. Pay some gas, right? Unfortunately, New Orleans went from 150 to 125. So we were actually getting about $5 less a week, which is typical wrestling promoter shit. But I never had a problem with Bill. He never said a mean word to me. He was always friendly. So I've got nothing bad to say with Bill Watts. I hear people bitch about it. The guy knew what he was doing.
Definitely. Great all-time booker. So
You
you
know,
leave there, like you said, and Jake brings you back to AWA, right? Is that the first time you work Hulk, or do you work Hulk when you go back to AWA?
yeah, I've worked Hulk 3 or 4 times on TV. I mean, never anywhere. But Hulk and me were for. I mean, Hulk would let me stay at his house. He lived near the airport, so if I had to fly home on Monday to go to work, he'd let me stay at his house. I mean, he was. Of course, one night on Hulk when he would pin you on TV, he'd do the pose and he'd stick his crotch in your face. So I bit his balls, and I let him know that I could have bit a lot harder.
What did he think about that? Jeez, he's probably like, I'm never doing that again.
He never said a word, but he knew what I did. I mean, I didn't bite, but he knew I could have.
Hey, crazy. Did you like working him, though? Besides that, did you like wrestling him?
Yeah, it was easy. I mean, you just let him do his thing with the people, and you take his leg drop, and that was about it.
Did you think he was going to get as over as he did? Because AWA is really with like the birth of Hulkamania, and you see how popular he's getting. But did you see how popular he was going to be?
Yeah, the fans bought him right away because they brought him in as a heel, and one time through the territory, and he turned himself babyface. And Vern probably should have given him the strap at some point, but Vern liked to have a wrestler have the strap.
Do you think that was the big fatal mistake? Not really downfall, but the big fatal mistake of the AWA. They had Hogan, wouldn't give him the title, he goes to WWF, and they take over the world.
Yeah. Well, they would have died out anyways. I don't think it mattered. Because if you looked at all of the territories, the only territory that didn't do this was Mid-South. They were all aging out. Nick had been there 15 years, right, as a champion.
Yep.
Mad Dog, Crusher, they'd all been there for 20 years. And then you go to Kansas City, Bob Brown had been there for 20 years. Even if you go down to, Florida, Dusty had been there for years and years. You can only keep the same. Dick the Bruiser in Indy. You can only keep they never brought in any fresh talent. It was the same guys who always drew the money, but were Bill Watts. When I was down there, they were bringing up DiBiase. Orendorff was one of their big stars, JYD, but they were bringing in fresh faces.
Right, so, Freebird, etc. Yep.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting thing with you and AWA. Like you said, with Baby Bull Leon White, like working him, Hogan when he's young, Scott Hall, right, when he comes in, Jerry Sags, like you're working all these guys. I had
Scott Hall's second match.
Wow.
He had wrestled on a Friday night in Mini against Jake, and he hurt Jake. And Jake said, be careful if you get him. So I got him in Vegas. I basically wore a tunic that night so I could choke him. And 10 years later, when he came into New York, he said, I remember what you did to me. Well, I was protecting myself. I had a job to go to.
Right. Did he understand that?
I don't know. I mean, if I didn't want to work with someone, I'd tell Greg. It's like when the Road Warriors came in. I said, Greg, don't book me with him because I'll get in my car and go home. And Hawk was all pissed when he came in to work. And he said, "Who the hell are you?" I said, "I'm a guy who's got a job on Monday." And I knew that they'd been told in Atlanta to just beat the shit out of the job guys. Well, I didn't need that. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough pull in New York, so the day they came into New York, I got stuck with them. And when I found Joe, I said, "Joe, you got your chance tonight." He says, "Shit, you were smart not to work with us. We didn't know what the hell we were doing back then." So
How were they in WWF working them? Were they okay?
they were fine. They were light as feather by then.
They smartened up. They knew how to work by that point.
Well, if you're working every night, eventually you got to smarten up because you got to do it again tomorrow.
Right.
And
Very
they
true.
finally learned that.
Was like Sags when you worked him, or Nails when you wrestled? Were they stiff? In the young day in AWA, or they were okay?
Well, I got Nails in his first match, and his first
another guy.
match was in
Wow.
Milwaukee, and Vern was there. And Vern said, "Don't talk to him. We haven't smartened him up yet." Here's a guy who's
Wow.
300 pounds of muscle, and the first thing it was a tag team. It was me and Brad against Steve Regal and him. And Regal went to run my head into his knee, and he brought his knee up and almost knocked me out. So at that point, I started talking. And whether Vern liked it or not, the hell with it. I wasn't about to get hurt. It was the only time I worked with Kevin. And
Yeah,
it wasn't his fault. He didn't know any better,
Big, scary dude, though. I mean, he's got to,
Yes.
smarten him up a little bit.
He was huge, and when they say he's not smart yet. I mean, but Vern was still when we protected the business.
So how do you get to WWF? You're mentioning that. How do you start getting booked by WWF all of a sudden?
Terry Garvin, who was the guy who booked their enhancement talent. I hate that term, but I was a job guy, not enhancement talent. But Terry Garvin booked them. He was in the office in Kansas City when I was there. So it's like a big circle, He knew me from Kansas City, and they were actually, we'd do Vegas, and then they'd fly us from Vegas to their shows, and so it was I knew everybody in the office in New York. You had Terry and Jack Lanza, and Nick was in there for a while, and so Ray Stevens was in their office. There were so many guys that I knew. I spent more time in the agent's office talking to the old timers. Rene Goulet was a friend of mine from the AWA, so they all knew me.
So when you get brought in, right, and you said you hate that term, enhancement talent, what are they bringing in? They just say, "Hey, we need you to come in. Here's a bunch of dates. We want you to do a bunch of jobs."
No, Terry would call and say, "We have TV here, and here. I need you to bring 8 guys." So I line up 8 guys from Milwaukee and Chicago and go wherever they wanted. And then there were other times where they only needed 2 or 3 because they were flying us. So then it was usually me and Jim Evans we traveled a lot because he was a really good hand. Unfortunately, he died at 51. So I got house shows with New York too, where they'd send me the house shows, So they took care of me. Unlike the AWA, they paid me per guy that I brought to the tapings.
Wow, so you get a stipend or like a little bit of a fee?
Yeah, because I never took anything for booking guys. For my guys, like a lot of the guys who booked talent would take 10%, or I never did that.
Yeah.
But it was nice because New York would just pay me for the extra guys. I could go out for 2 days and make $1,200. I think the most I ever made for 2 days was $1,800.
Pretty good.
which was, and one of them I might not have even worked on. So
Yeah, you always hear that story about certain guys, like even Stallion, when he was booking the Hardy Boys, he would take a fee from them, and he'd
yeah,
take a percentage.
a
Yeah,
lot of guys did that. I didn't think they were putting their body on the line just like I was. Why should I get paid? I mean, the AWA took care of me because I worked almost every weekend somewhere. So I can't. They took care of me by giving me house shows. I mean,
right.
New York gave me some house shows, but it wasn't nearly as many as the AWA.
Now, why do you hate the term enhancement talent? Why do you hate that term?
Because I was a job guy. See, the difference is people don't understand the job guy doesn't mean you're doing a job. To us, it was a job. It was a part-time job. It was like the guy living next door to me, he's going to 7-Eleven on Sunday and spending his day at 7-Eleven for $4 an hour. I'm driving to Green Bay, putting on my underwear and going out in front of a bunch of people and making $200. It was a part-time job. That's all it was. They were never going to push me. I was never going to get just a job. Not saying you don't want to be good at your job, but it was a job.
Very
And
true.
I don't consider it a derogatory term because I was a job guy. That's what I was, unfortunately.
Is there such a thing as enhancement talent? I'm not sure where that term actually comes from, but is that
New
such
York
a thing?
started using that term because they thought job guy was demeaning.
Wow.
So
Okay.
your job was to enhance the stars, which I think I did a pretty good job of. I mean, but I just like the term job guy because that's what I was.
When you're there, right? Do you have any interactions with Vince at all, or that no? It's Terry and whoever's
Yeah,
bringing in.
I had a little. I had people tell me I couldn't talk to him the way I talked to him. We
Oh,
were
really?
there one. We were there one time, and I had like 12 guys there, and they were just starting the King of the Ring thing, and they wanted to see if my guys could carry the King of the Ring out to the ring. They paid them all for that. It was nice. They gave them an extra $50 or something each. But in the afternoon, they had John Studd get on the thing, right? And Vince started laughing because Studd was so big and heavy. And I said, Vince, you won't be laughing later when you see how we work. And everyone goes, you can't talk to Vince like that. I said, sure I can. What's he going to do? Fire me? I mean, the whole deal in wrestling was you had to, if you let them know that you really cared, then they had you. It's like when you worked in a territory like for Bill or for Geigel or even for Vern, if you're getting a draw every night, they know you're broke. They know you can't go anywhere. So they know they can get away giving you nothing, right? If you never take a draw, they never know when you're going to get in your car and leave. So you got them. So I never took a draw in all my years of wrestling.
That's a good point too. Yeah, because if you do, they know that hey, this guy needs some
Every
money
night
now.
if every night you need your $50, you got nothing in your wallet. Where are you going to go?
Good point. Yeah, never even thought about that. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
So they love guys who took draws every night because they had complete control over them.
Right. Makes perfect sense. Yeah. Damn, that's crazy. So, who were some of the guys that you like worked at first when you first got there? Were like Bulldogs, Stallions, Rockers? So, like, was that who you kind of doing a lot of tag matches?
No, I worked with the Rockers because I knew them from the AWA though. And then singles matches. I mean, there's stuff I see on TV that I don't even remember, but I worked with Jake Roberts.
There's a lot.
I worked with Jake Roberts quite a bit because I knew Jake from We had worked together for like a month straight down in Mid-South. And I worked with him when he had a broken arm, so he knew he could trust me. So they'd ask for me. Brutus. I used to love working Brutus in New York because I knew him when he was in Mid-South when I was there. And he was so clumsy. You could hardly have a match with Brutus back then. And Robley would always say, get as much time as you can, but don't go too long. So I knew Brutus real well. So I said, just snip off some hair in the underneath. So he never shaved me hardly at all. He'd clip a little off and throw it.
Yeah.
Where other guys, he would. I know we have one guy from here who went, Chris Curtis, and Chris was a week away from his wedding, I think, and he got Brutus, and Brutus shaved him bald. His wife was so mad, but they paid extra for the haircut. So if you did the haircut, I think they doubled your pay for that match. And New York was paying like $1. They were paying $1.50 for TV.
Did you mind losing so much on TV? Just because I know it's awesome that you're on TV, and you were on TV a lot. Like, you're on TV a ton, but you're always losing. Does that matter, or you didn't care? Like you said, it's just a job.
Didn't matter to me. It was a job. I knew I was not. When I made my decision to quit, that was when the business was changing, and it was going to all the steroid guys. Yeah. Unless you look like Hulk, or you look like Kevin Von Erich, or you were already over. You weren't getting over, right? And I was not a big gym guy. And I knew the only chance I had was to be a manager. And in fact, I was scheduled to go back to Kansas City as a manager and try to do kind of a Bobby Heenan type deal. And the day after I made that agreement with Geigel to come back down, the electric company in Milwaukee called me and offered me a job. Union, dental, healthcare. I couldn't pass that up. So I took the job and called them and said, forget it. And at that point, I knew, yeah, just do it as a job. I'll make a little money on the side. And I mean, I was making pretty good money on the side. I was making maybe $1,000 a month, working 3 times a month on the side. 1980, what's that today?
Not too shabby, yeah.
So I was in the best of all worlds. I got to work, usually in the AWA, it was the first match, right? So I could jump in my car. If I worked Milwaukee, I could be home before the third match went on. I got there at 7. I was home by 8:45. You make $200-300. You can't beat that as a part-time job.
What did you think about some of the top guys that you worked at WWF, like Piper and Warrior? What did you think about those guys?
Warrior was a jerk. I didn't like him, but he couldn't press me. I was a fat fuck. I didn't know how to help myself. So he was not happy the night we worked. I didn't like Brett. I thought Brett was a prick. I hear him bitching on TV. He never hurt anybody. That's bullshit. He gave me the pile driver, and I thought he broke my frickin' neck. I liked his brother. I thought Owen was a great guy. I never worked with him, but had lunch with him one day in the somewhere in North Dakota or South Dakota. Sioux City? No, that's Iowa. I don't remember. Whatever the big city, Rapid City, South Dakota. We had lunch. There. We stayed at the same hotel. But I thought he was a great guy, but I never worked with him. I worked with Coco Bior, but I can't tell you what the man. I mean, again, one match was just like the next. I know I worked with X-Pac. I didn't realize I worked with him until someone said he called me the best jobber of all time on Twitter a couple
Oh,
of
get
years
out
ago.
of town. Wow.
And I think I had him his inaugural dark match. It's on YouTube. In fact, he came in and did a signing at one of the local shows in Milwaukee, and I went and saw him. But I think he called me the top enhancement talent, and I told him I wasn't enhancement talent. So, but he seemed like a nice guy. I really didn't. I mean, a lot of those guys, I would just get there, go. I mean, I worked with Dusty. I don't know who I couldn't even tell you. I worked with Tito, I'm sure. Well, I worked with him in the
Slaughter.
AWA too. I worked with Jake. I worked with Beefcake. I'd have to see.
Duggan, Slaughter.
I never worked with Duggan, and I don't think I
Oh,
worked
no.
with Slaughter. I don't think I worked with Slaughter in New York. I may have worked with him in the AWA. But they're all, unless there was something interesting about the match, I honestly don't remember. I don't remember who else I worked with. I know I worked with the Powers of Pain, and I got Chief and Rene Goulet in trouble that night. It was in Oakland, and they knocked me cold with their finish. And the next night, I went up to Pat, and I said, Pat, what the hell do you fly me all the way to Oakland for to work with the Powers of Pain? You could have got anybody to work with them. And I guess he went and bitched out Renee and Chief. And so when I saw them that night, they weren't real thrilled. Oh, there's the big shot. So they got their ass chewed. But it made no sense to fly me 2,000 miles to get my ass kicked.
They knew you were the best jobber. You know what I mean?
The best jobber, you should put him in a match where he can work. Can't work with the Powers of Pain.
Right, not against two guys you're going to get killed. Yeah.
I can't. They're not going to work with me.
Did you work Steamboat at all?
Nope. I knew him, but never worked with him. I heard he was.
How about
great. Who?
Oh yeah. What about like Boss Man, Bam Bam, like the bigger guys? You worked them too?
No, not that I know of.
Wow. It felt like you worked so many guys. It feels like you had so many matches though in WWF.
Well, I watch stuff now sometimes. Like I go, I don't remember wrestling that guy. I know I wrestled Terry Taylor one night in Florida. And like I said, I wrestled Kerry Von Erich after the kid broke his neck.
Yep.
Now I know Red Rooster was not happy with me that night. This is kind of when my career was ending, and I never seen him wrestle or anything. And he wanted to go over the match and over the match and over the match. And I kept walking away from him. I said, Terry, I got it. And if we screw it up, we'll call it in the ring. He would say he was on pins and needles thinking he was going to lose his job.
He's just being extra careful, I guess.
You know, but he didn't know me. He was one of the guys I didn't know. And at that point, I really didn't give a shit anymore. I was there to collect a paycheck completely. And
you worked WCW as well?
Nope. I worked Kerry in New York. That was it. I knew David. I didn't like David. I knew Gino. I never worked with Gino. Gino's an interesting story. He came in and worked for Bill, and I traveled with him for a week. I was his ride. And it's strange that he died of a drug overdose because he never even had a beer when I was with him. So I question that whole thing. And maybe I just didn't
they
know.
had that Dark Side of the Ring about that. Yeah, like a lot of controversy. Yeah.
But he never had a drink when he was with me, and I was with him for a week. So that was.
What about World Championship Wrestling? Did you work WCW?
Never went there. I basically worked.
Oh, I never did. Okay.
I worked
You
St.
might
Louis,
have
Kansas
ventured
City.
out.
I worked for Watts, and then I worked for Vernon for New York. That's it.
How'd you end up leaving like WWF and not working? Did you just not want to take any more bookings, or what happened with WWF?
Well, when my kid was 6, he started playing Little League. And he was playing with 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And when he turned 8, which was 1994, he was on 3 different traveling baseball teams, 2 of which I helped coach. And we played 100 games a year baseball. And you were gone.
Sorry about that. Lost you for a second.
Okay.
You were saying about leaving WWF. I only caught up your kid.
Okay. My kid was playing ball. I was 40 years old. I'd rather be at the baseball game than on a plane going to wrestle. So I maybe worked a little in 95 and 96, but not much, because I never missed a baseball game. So if I still wrestled, it would have been in fall and winter. But I don't even know the dates when I quit, actually. I couldn't tell you.
Wow.
I mean, the dates all fall together. Like, I don't know when the team challenge was in the AWA.
Oh, God.
I don't remember what years that was. I was still wrestling during the team challenge because the final of it was me and Jake and can't think of the other kid's name now. He was from Minneapolis. Don't remember his name, but I know they put us in one of these 3-way dances, and they never told us how to do it. It was before anyone did 3-way dances. And Jake's still waiting for his check for winning the damn thing. He won $1 million. I don't know. Vern never sent him the check. But again, I don't know the years. So it's hard for me. All that stuff runs together. Like, I don't know. I know we did a thing with Jake when he had the eye deal and he couldn't see on I don't remember what year that was.
Yeah, 91. Yep.
So I was still working in 91, and I think I still worked a little in 94 and 95. But it was winding down at that point.
As we hit the wind down here, we head towards the finish. Any regrets as far as the business? Anything that you kind of wish was different, or everything worked out the way you wanted? It's a job and you just moved on.
Well, I mean, initially when I did it, I was hoping someone would let me manage, and I thought as a manager, because I was okay on the mic, and I would have got better if I could have done it. I thought if I could have done like a Heenan type character, make it my own. But when I decided, let's take the health insurance and it was what it was. I got no regrets. I got to work with some of the greatest wrestlers of all time, right? Everyone from Nick to Mad Dog to Ray Stevens to Pat Patterson. I mean, I got to work Pat Patterson. We had a sold-out house in Minneapolis. We had closed circuit next door. That was a thrill of a lifetime. And the first thing Pat said when we were getting in the ring we're getting the instructions from the referee is just remember, kid, if I get behind you, you're fucked. And then I'm making my comeback, and he's on the mat going, kiss me on the lips, Mary, kiss me. I mean, that wrestling Pat was great because we got to do it in front of a big house, and it wasn't a TV match, so we could have a real match. I wrestled Baron, I wrestled Mad Dog Vachon. I got to wrestle so many of the top guys that I got no regrets. But I will tell you, looking at the business from afar, like when my dad was the ring announcer and he saw the guys fly in from Minnie and they'd have them, and they get back on the plane and it looked glamorous. I didn't realize I was going to be doing 100,000 miles a year on my car, driving all over the Midwest. Nobody tells you that until you actually start doing it. So,
yep.
But I got no complaints. And I think the other thing is I have no complaints because if you ask anybody, they all know I could work. They all knew I was a good guy. You know? Especially Sean.
Definitely, like Sean said, like what known as one of the best job guys. That's for sure. Definitely, that's the reputation.
Well, I mean,
pretty damn good.
I was the northern version of George South from everything I've heard about him. And I've never met George, even though we texted back and forth one time. But I would think Flair would tell you that George South was the best.
Right. So as far as you in like social media, is there anywhere where fans can like find you and follow you, or you're not really, you're kind of off the grid?
No, I wrote a book. And if anybody wants a copy of my book, all they have to do is send me an email at tom.rocky.stone@gmail.com. I'll send them a PDF copy. It's no longer available on Amazon. I'll just send them the PDF copy. Or if they text, if they let you know, you can let me know. I'll be happy to send them a copy.
Awesome. Sounds great. Tom Stone, thank you so much for all the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Have a good evening.